Greetings, salutations, and words of goodwill. So I've decided to deviate in this particular video from my typical topics of philosophy and theology to discuss a political matter that's contemporaneously important. I had, for the most part, thought that the topic of Trump losing the popular vote in the 2016 election had died away to the point that no one was talking about it anymore. However, at the end of last month, Chris Hayes had a whole monologue about how the Electoral College was in essence unconstitutional despite being mandated by the Constitution. And this past week or so, in relation to the whole Ukraine situation and the possibility of his impeachment. And while I'm in favor of the Electoral College and don't think it should go anywhere, in fact, I'd like to see us revert a little bit and have it return to what it was originally meant to be, where we elect some wise person from our local community and they all congregate somewhere and elect one of their own to be our magnanimous philosopher king. I just want to point out something that's very important. It is the case that Trump lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton in the sense that she got more individual votes than he did. However, what people often forget when discussing this topic is that Trump and Clinton were not the only candidates running for president, and it's also the case that neither one of them won an absolute majority. Hayes actually completely ignores this point and makes the following statement on Twitter. These days, conservatism is a movement deeply paranoid and pessimistic about its own appeal, increasingly retreating behind counter-majoritarian institutions, the Senate, the courts, the Electoral College. Now, there's only one problem with that. Conservatives actually won the popular vote, whereas Clinton got more individual votes than Trump. The conservative candidates in the election as a whole got more than 50% of the vote, meaning that the country as a whole would prefer a conservative candidate to a liberal one, or at least in this last election would have preferred a conservative candidate to a liberal one. How is this the case? Well, Trump got roughly 46% of the popular vote, and Clinton got roughly 48%. However, there were four other, I don't know if you want to say major candidates in the race, but four other candidates that got noticeable amounts of the electorate, namely Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, Evan McMullin, and Darrell Castle. Whereas Trump and Clinton combined only amount for roughly 94% of the electorate, when you take these six candidates together, they amount for 99.3%, give or take. The other 0.7 is split amongst 24 or so others, with over 0.5% going to random write-in candidates who presumably weren't even running. Probably some among them Bernie Sanders and Faith Spotted Eagle. Why does this matter? Well, if you consider those top six candidates, two of them are left of center, and four of them are right of center. Now, that only matters when you start to look at the numbers, because if you add up Trump and Johnson and McMullin and Castle's votes as a group, as a conservative bloc, you might say, in the presidential election, the result is slightly more than 50%. Meaning that while Trump and Clinton were not palatable to many Americans, the majority of them wanted a conservative candidate to be president. which means that the conservative movement is, or at least was in 2016 when it came to the presidential election, the majority of Americans. That, in and of itself, is a point which I think is not worth forgetting. Now, on top of that, I'd like to add a second point, which is mildly relevant. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we do abolish the Electoral College and make the president a popular vote institution. Now, that actually would be completely contrary to every other element of the Constitution, despite what Chris Hayes says. But let's just say we did it. Under the current system of the Electoral College, the president cannot be elected by a simple majority, but must be elected by an absolute majority, meaning that it is not sufficient to simply get the most votes, but in order to be elected president, you have to get over half of the votes, which no candidate did for the popular election in this last set of voting. Therefore, it's reasonable to conclude that were we to make it an issue of popular election, that this necessity for getting half of the votes would continue, and that what would happen is that we would have a runoff election, which is common in many different states for many different positions, that if someone doesn't get 50%, that you take the top two candidates and everybody votes again, so that the people who voted for lesser candidates have the capacity then to vote for the two people who are most popular and would have otherwise won the previous election. If that happened, given that conservatives made up the majority of the electorate, it is not impossible that Trump would have actually won anyway. Now, there were far more conservative never-Trumpers than there were liberal never-Clintonites, I guess you'd say. But ignoring the 0.7% of individuals who voted for one of those 24 other candidates or so, or Bernie Sanders, or their Uncle Steve, right? Because it's just not possible to have the data, and it's a waste of time to work through all those candidates. And some of those candidates are clearly liberal, some of them are clearly conservative, and some of them, like the representatives of the American Solidarity Party, are somewhere in the middle. So putting that to the side for 1 second, if we just consider these top 6 candidates, which I realize is not perfect, but it's all the work I'm willing to put into the second part of the video. If all of Jill Stein's supporters voted for Clinton, all that would be necessary for Trump to win would be for 80% of the conservatives who didn't vote for him to vote for him in the runoff. And if we consider the probable reality that a number of Stein supporters would simply stay home and not vote, if slightly more than 72% of the people who did not vote for Clinton or Trump showed up and voted with, as it were, their side of the political spectrum, Trump also would have won. So it's actually not obvious that Trump even would have lost the popular vote. So anyway, I think that's worth pointing out. Please like, subscribe, comment below, and until next time, God bless and have a great day.